Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We have a lot to cover today. Let's get right to it. I first want to welcome back contributor Juan P. Villasmil. Sorry, JP. I butchered your voice, but I can say JP real well. Welcome back. It's been a while.
Hey, how are you, man? It's good to be back.
Just we have a great topic to dive into, but before we do, I want to take a couple moments, tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hey, everyone. I'm JP. I'm a Young Voices contributor. I'm also an ISI fellow at the Spectator World, and I'm starting grad school at Georgetown University. I'm studying foreign policy. So I read a lot about the world, but I deeply care about our country. So I read a lot about our culture, history, and current events. And the piece that we're going to discuss today is actually about a current event, which you may have or may have not heard about. Probably not.
Yeah, if you were living in a cave with your eyes shut and your hands over your ears, you probably didn't hear about this. But anywhere else, the assassination attempt on former President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania last week raised so many interesting questions and possibilities. And you have an excellent article here in The Spectator that I think rightly compares him to Teddy Roosevelt and something similar Teddy Roosevelt went through. But let's talk about Trump here for just a second. This guy, it's hard to find people who are lukewarm on him. Okay, you either love him or you hate him. And when I say hate, I mean like with the intensity of 1,000 suns hate that guy. What did we learn about the way he reacted to this attempt?
Well, if there were any doubts about whether Trump was courageous or not, then this settles it. In my article, I begin by mentioning his famous line, at the end of the day, they're not coming after me. They're coming after you, and I'm just standing in the way. He loves to repeat this phrase, and his fans love it. They really like it. It's really famous. It's in a lot of, pictures with him in the background with looking at the camera. But his detractors don't believe it. They've always painted him ever since he descended that escalator as an egotistical megalomaniac who's just a narcissist and he's obsessed with himself. But the fact that he got shot at and then he stood up, at first he's like, where are my shoes? Where are my shoes? But then with blood in his face, his first reaction is to say, fight, fight, fight. And you can see it in his eyes. You can see it in his face. Of course, there's adrenaline there. Like he's a man. Like I'm sure his testosterone levels went up like crazy. He wanted to jump through a wall, but you can see it in his face. The way he says, fight, fight, fight. I've never seen that face before on that man. And I think that proved that he's really courageous, because we can all talk about what we would have done. But when you're in a situation like that, you never know. Some people get paralyzed. Some people run away, and some people fight, fight, fight. And Trump is one of those people. And I think that's the person that America wants as a leader. And I feel really bad for Joe Biden because this is quite the difference.
and I gotta say, maybe you don't need me to say this, but I've heard a lot of people echo what you have just described here. And often it'll be with a caveat. Look, I'm not a Trump fan, or I haven't been a Trump fan, but I cannot deny that I saw real courage on display there. And maybe that's a kind of inspiring moment some people needed. But this is not something that is an anomaly in our country's history. Talk to me a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt and how we can draw some parallels to an incident that happened to him as he was out speaking.
Yeah, so of course there are many OGs, many people who've been shot in American history, but I like Teddy a lot. Actually I have some of his biographies in my background. You can't see it, sadly. But Teddy Roosevelt has this story that was the first thing that came to mind when I saw the event, the current event live. And the story goes something like this. More than 100 years ago, at the Milwaukee Auditorium on October 14, 1912, Teddy displayed a level of courage that shocked the nation. And since then, if you take American history class, you probably heard this story, so maybe I'm repeating it. I never heard it in my class. My teacher was really good, but he never told me this one. I learned this one by myself. But he started his speech by asking his audience to be quiet. And, that was quite a one-liner, like, hey, please be quiet. And people are like, oh, what's going on? And then he goes, I don't know whether you know this or not, but your president has been shot. I'm paraphrasing there. And of course, the crowd gasped. They're like, whoa, what's going on? This had happened outside the Gilpatrick Hotel, before he went to the auditorium. So some hours have passed by. And actually, what had happened is that he got shot, and his manuscript in his coat's pocket was what stopped the shot. And the actual bullet only pinked him in the chest. And then Teddy, this is how they were told the story. He coughed into his hand 3 times. He went, huh, 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 to see if there was telltale blood, to see if his lungs were injured, right? Because again, this guy was a fighter. He was in the military. He fought hard, so he knew all these techniques, and he just checked really quickly, like, let's see if I can do this. Let's see my current condition. The medic that was with him in his roofless car goes like, let's go to the hospital. And he goes like, no, no, no. Take me to that speech. Not only that, like maybe I'm talking to it. I love this story. He also, when the crowd went crazy at the hotel, this is not at the convention yet, at the event, the crowd went crazy and they started to chant to kill the guy that shot him. And he was like, no, 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 don't kill him. Bring him here. And they brought the guy that had shot him. And Teddy looked at him in the eye. He looks at fear straight in the eye. This is what courage definitionally means. And he tells the guy, why do you do this? And the guy's just speechless. And after the guy says nothing, Teddy, who just got shot, goes like, all right, just give him to the police. Back to the speech. He starts unbuttoning his shirt to reveal his bloody undershirt. And that's where he says, his very famous line, it takes more than dad to kill bull moose.
Wow.
And the crowd goes crazy. Of course, like whenever I tell that story, when I compare it to Trump, it's kind of like hard because this one is so dramatic and it's just so poetic. But let's remember, he was not on the stage when he got shot, and he didn't have a bunch of Secret Service people jump onto him. But the same courage that I'm describing of looking at fear in the eye, of standing up and saying, I'm going to do it anyways, is the same fear we saw with Donald Trump. And we saw it right at the moment where he stood up. And, people say like, oh, but like the shooter was already dead. Like, oh, it's not courage. He was just looking for the photo op. What are you talking about? What do you know? Like in that moment, he just got shot. Most people won't stand up. Most people won't say fight, fight, fight. Most people won't go for the picture. Even the craziest narcissist is afraid for their own life. Even the craziest narcissist,
right?
When they get shot, they're scared.
So what's the takeaway? We got about a minute here, but look, this is not a campaign ad for Donald Trump, but I do believe that picture of him, with his fist raised and the flag behind him, I think it's probably destined to be as iconic as the flag raising on Iwo Jima, in the annals of American history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the takeaway is that the series of events are just not on Biden's side here. Whatever you think about Trump, the man, and again, well, I'm not saying that he's like a superhero now and he's the son of God. He's a man after all, and he will have his problems like every leader. But at least optically, it's very difficult now to go out there and call Trump a fascist and the son of Hitler. It's very hard to paint him as someone who has no courage, someone who's doesn't have the American people in mind. This version of Trump, the Trump we saw in that moment, and the Trump that we will probably see till, the election comes, is a Trump that's going to win.
JP,
and it's a Trump
Wonderful to visit with you. Unfortunately, we're up against the clock. I've got a link to your article in the show notes. Look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Welcome back. This is our second segment on today's Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Jacob Fox to the program today. Jacob, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. For people who are meeting you for the first time, take a moment here. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm currently a senior economics major at Hillsdale College up in Michigan. And I'm looking to go into the field of city planning. So I really enjoy writing and researching different things involving the housing crisis that my generation is kind of getting themselves into, and issues related to transportation.
Let me tell you, I feel your pain as far as the housing crisis, because a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I received notice that we had to be out of our rental within the next 2 months. And we could buy a house now if we want, but we're looking, maybe renting would be easier because everything is so stinking expensive. So let's talk a little bit about why is everything so expensive, and then let's talk a little bit about something that's contributing to that may not be so widely known.
Yeah, so a lot of what dominates current discourse on the subject is things like the inflation rate that has happened since 2020. That leads to high mortgage rates, banks not being able to get good mortgages for people that are looking to be first-time home buyers. And people aren't selling their homes because, if you sell your home, then you have to leave your really good interest rate and get into a lot higher of one. And a lot of times that significantly impacts how expensive of a home you're able to buy. And so people are kind of hunkering down, waiting to see what the market does. And that makes it really hard for people like yourselves trying to transition or getting into the home market for the first time.
Man, I'll tell you, I'm not a first-time home buyer, but I remember thinking, wow, this is a lot of money 30 some years ago. And it's just an order of magnitude greater, how much the costs are. And a lot of that, we even built a home of our own at one point. And, there was concern, construction materials are pretty expensive. How does that play into today's high housing prices when it comes to building new homes? What's the status? I remember during COVID, there was a point where I think it was a sheet of OSB board was like $27, where before it had been, $15 or something like that. Are the prices much, much higher? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, so housing construction costs have just gone up consistently, especially over the past few years, due to a lot of different reasons. Some talk about labor shortages in skilled trades. Others are just talking about how people are having a difficult time affording, just with their incomes, potentially buying a home. And so you have some construction companies that might be going out of business. But construction material cost makes up roughly 60% of new construction cost. And so when we look at the issue of why is it so expensive to build a home, one of the things we have to look toward is, well, where are the materials coming from? Why are they so expensive? And what I found really interesting when looking into this issue is that since 2016 with Trump, but continuing with Biden here in 2021 and up to the present day, we've been placing heavy tariffs on essential building materials. For instance, we have a 25% duty rate on Chinese steel, which is up from the 0 to 7.5% that it was previously. You might be like, okay, well, that's China. We have kind of some rocky relations with China. Even Canadian softwood lumber, which, Canada has a large lumber market. We use so much of it since they're really close. And we have 5 to 20% duty rates on Canadian softwood lumber, which at least in 2021 alone has added an extra $24,000 in new construction costs for things like housing. And that adds up over time. You can't have high interest rates, high material costs, high labor costs, and expect to get a new house easily built.
No, and people who may be naive enough to think, well, these big companies that are doing construction, they're making lots of money. After all, houses are expensive, so they can afford it. But that's not who the cost stops with, is it?
Right. It's always passed on to the consumer. And I mean, you might ask yourself, well, why is it that we have these tariffs in the first place? Who is it benefiting? And for the most part, it is benefiting those large companies that have paid for lobbyists to go down to DC and make sure that, they can keep their lumber at that high price because we can't find it cheaper in China or Canada.
Wow.
You might be thinking, well, we have plenty of workers that benefit from, a booming lumber industry, all of the people that work in those businesses. And that is true, that there's a lot of people that benefit. However, those types of jobs are also benefited from a construction boom. The freight industry just booms whenever we have a bunch of construction. You have to move the lumber everywhere. You have the actual construction industry itself, all of the builders, all of the planners, all of the tradesmen that are able to work on these new houses. And those industries are being hurt by these predatory tariffs that squeeze out this new construction. And then at the end of the day, what we've been talking about for the rest of this time, which is the home buyer that's trying to build their new home. I mean, on the consumer side of things, there's a bunch of people hurt by these policies.
So I know Trump was pretty big on tariffs when he was president. And, that was kind of, asserting we're protecting the worker, we're strengthening the American economy. I'm a little surprised to learn that Biden actually is pretty solid in keeping these tariffs up and maybe even looking to raise them.
I know. And Biden has put in some policies in place which he thinks is going to be able to counteract the rising housing costs and the housing crisis, kind of on the other side of the equation. So he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too. He wants to have his tariffs and protect domestic industry. And then he wants cheaper housing prices through his mortgage relief tax credits and down payment assistance plans, which these programs sound great on paper. They cost a projected $1.5 billion. They're slated to help 3.4 million families. And I mean, studying economics in college, I can tell you that, I mean, that does sound promising, but there are a few issues with that plan. The first one being just on its face that's a temporary measure. I mean, the 1.5 billion is going to dry up eventually. And the 3.4 million families are not the 330 million people that are living in the United States, as a broader economic solution would help. But the other issue is when you call what we call subsidizing demand, which is making it easier for more people to enter into the marketplace to buy a good or service, that's also just going to drive up the price of that good or service because now more people are competing for it. So in allowing more people to afford that down payment through down payment assistance, then every house is going to have a higher price because now there are more people looking at that house because they can afford the house through the down payment assistance plan. And so when you look at who actually benefits from Biden's, supposed solution on the other side of this equation, it's actually the home sellers who are now able to sell their house for a higher price. And that is not helping who needs to be helped the most.
So the bottom line is, even though it may seem counterintuitive to some, removing these tariffs actually frees up the market to find that equilibrium, and people who want to buy homes should be able to find them more affordable without those tariffs. Likewise, it should help the companies that build homes to have enough business to be profitable.
I know. I've heard it compared to like a game of musical chairs, because some people will say, the people that are able to afford new construction, those are people that are already financially very well off, and therefore decreasing construction costs is only helping that top echelon that's looking to build a new home. However, like a game of musical chairs, whenever you add more chairs to the game, regardless of which chair each person picks, more chairs keeps the last person from running out of a place to stay or a place to sit, basically. So if the couple that's looking to build a new home to go into retirement is able to successfully build a new home, then the family that could use all that extra space in their larger home that they're moving out of is able to move, and they're moving out of their starter home. And then the new family who's looking to move into a starter home is able to move into a starter home. And so it has this trickle-down effect where the overall housing supply affects everyone in the economy. And those are the types of solutions that we should be looking for especially whenever we have such economic turmoil as we have now.
Again, we're talking with Jacob Fox, a Young Voices contributor. Jacob, thank you so much. Great to visit with you.
Yes, thank you for having me.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Alex Rosado back to the program. Alex, good to connect up with you again. Tell me a little, well, tell our audience who are meeting you for the first time a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me. I'm Alex Rosado. I just graduated from Gettysburg College, summa cum laude, this May. And I have some prior experience at the Hudson Institute as a political studies fellow, a fellowship that I had last summer. I worked at my school's think tank as well as a fielding fellow, doing a project for the State Department this last year, and then also doing an outside fellowship with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress this past year as well. So my forte is with domestic elections and all things campaigns related.
Boy, you got your hands full this year, don't you?
Dabble in a little bit of everything.
Well, but look at where we were 1 month ago, okay, prior to the first presidential debate, and look at where we are today. Have things shifted as much for you as it feels like they've shifted for me?
Well, we're all feeling the same thing at the end of the day. And especially with this campaign cycle, there is something new every single day. And especially with how the Democrat and Republican Party have operated in trying to navigate all of these new comings, there's been a lot of struggle, but I think there's a lot of adaptability and a lot of lessons learned with their leadership visions as well. And especially with the Democratic Party after the debate, they saw that what's happening at the top of the ticket may not be the best for them going into November. And I think right now they're having a little bit of an organizational management crisis because they've lost a sense of identity of who they think they should lead the party with. Right now, there's 24 representatives that are currently in the House calling for President Biden to suspend his campaign. Now, whether or not those calls have merits because they want new leadership vision or they just don't like Biden himself is yet to be determined. But truly, this is a struggle that we're all seeing for ourselves within the media, within people talking to us about it. And I think this is a story that we should all be paying attention to.
Wow. Yeah, let's start with Biden. So clearly he had issues at the debate. I mean, I don't believe the press when they go, wait, why didn't someone tell us that there was some kind of, cognitive decline on his part? But it's very out in the open now. And so there has been, a couple of weeks now at least of kind of panic on the part of the Democrats. Do we back him? Does he stay in the race? He seems like he wants to, but it sounds like there have been voices speaking up going, Mr. President, do the right thing and step aside, let somebody else in. And then, of course, we have the assassination attempt on Donald Trump last weekend, which I wouldn't have believed if you would have told me, that would really strengthen a guy's position, but it appears that it has. It just seems like the whole landscape has shifted. Let's start with the Democrats. What are their choices? It seems like they're between a rock and a hard place.
It's either they stick with Biden, who has continued to flounder since the debate. I mean, even at the NATO conference that happened a couple days ago, he had his first solo press conference in months. And the gaffes that were picked up by the airwaves was that he mistakenly called the Ukrainian President Zelensky, called him Putin, and then also mixed up his own vice president's name, calling her Vice President Trump. And those were a lot of headlines that were making the news saying that he was unfit to lead because of these gaffes. And then even say with the Republican side with the assassination attempt was absolutely horrible. And I think a day that will be remembered in the history books and as a pivotal moment in our generation, especially in a very politically polarized time in politics. There's a lot going on both sides. And especially for those that are knee deep in the campaign cycle, this is really where you're going to get your expertise and your work in as well. Wow.
I mean, look, I've learned through sad experience, you don't rule out anything because, none of this is written in stone, but I'm really not anxious to find out what the next surprise might be. What are your thoughts? Where could it go from here? It looks like Donald Trump pretty much has a lock on the GOP nomination, assuming that, someone doesn't succeed in taking him out of the picture. What about the Democrats, though? What are their options?
They have Kamala Harris as a backbencher, and there have been a lot of inside conversations within Washington trying to prop her up at the front of the ticket. And the question remains, who would her vice presidential pick be if she ascended to the top? And a lot of people were suggesting potentially Roy Cooper, the governor of North Carolina, because she just held an infrastructure conference with him in the past couple days. Potentially Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has been a name that has also floated around due to his rise in the 2020 Democratic primaries. But he has a lot of baggage with him as well, especially with the mishandling of the East Palestine train crisis that happened back in 2023. And the Republicans know that too. That's why they've invited the mayor of East Palestine, Trent Conway, to speak at the Republican National Convention that is currently happening.
Okay.
They have a bench more so. There's a lot of other governors, such as Gavin Newsom from California, but he hasn't really done the best job of managing his state in terms of the migrant crisis that's happening there. There's a lot of homelessness, especially within the San Francisco area. But then they have some other picks as well, such as Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who was had a assassination attempt or kidnapping plot foiled against her, and then also J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, as well.
Wow. I mean, we always love a good, exciting political race, but this is kind of pushing the limits of excitement to where it's not just exhilarating, it's actually becoming somewhat terrifying.
You really couldn't think of this if you really tried to. I mean, it's unfortunate that this is the situation that we're dealing with, where potentially the top incumbent president might be yanked a couple months before the convention, where essentially everything is going to be reborn and redone for a managerial and bureaucratic class that is running the government instead of the people that elect their officials to the government. I think that's really the first point where you have to start with as well. And some of the celebrities, such as George Clooney, who raised $30 million with Biden and Obama at a fundraiser recently, now calling for him to step down. I think there are larger voices within the government that are signaling that this isn't the vision and leadership that we need. And this is a last-minute scramble. In The Wizard of Oz, they said, don't look at the man behind the curtain. But the curtain has been pulled, and everybody's seeing it for themselves now.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to ignore. Now, you mentioned something in your article, and I can't disagree with this, although I feel for the Democrats in that, Biden's age is an issue, but if they were to remove him as their preferred candidate, it would leave them vulnerable in ways that leaving him in wouldn't. What a conundrum.
The age is certainly an issue, but of course, aging is something that affects everybody differently. But more so, it's the stamina of the candidate that is an issue. I mean, we have right now, Trump and Biden are the two oldest candidates for president in American history. And especially what you're seeing with Trump right now, speaking of the assassination attempt that just happened, people forget that he is 78 years old. And he was someone that just got shot in the ear, was 0.3 millimeters away from his brain. But he got up within a matter of 20 seconds and was escorted out by Secret Service and made a surprise appearance at the Republican National Convention last night. That was something that he didn't have to do, but that was to prove that he has the stamina to stay within this race, even within the most existential circumstances. Now, especially with Biden, there's been a lot of clips of him repeatedly falling off his bike or falling on the steps of Air Force One. And when you contrast that, it really becomes a matter of the stamina, not the age itself. And I think especially with what the founders wanted in Federalist 70, they said that we need an energetic executive in the sense of function, but also within the character of who leads it itself. And I think especially that's going to be important going forward.
So I'm not asking you to make predictions, but do you have any things that you would encourage us to keep our eye on as we move through the next few weeks and toward that November election?
There's always going to be an October surprise, but especially because of how volatile everything has been leading up to right now, everything is a surprise, truly is. So I would just really want to keep my eye on what happens with the Democratic National Convention, because Trump and Vance have secured their place as president and vice president nominees, respectively, for the Republicans. But within the next 4 weeks, it is going to be a marathon, not a sprint to that convention. So make sure that news gets out accordingly, and we'll have to keep our eye out and see. Okay.
I appreciate your analysis. I also liked in your article, the call for let's remember why we're voting. In other words, you were calling for civility to drive our vote more so than, there so we can punish and vanquish our enemies. It's important we have in mind what actually we stand for more so than just what we're against. Again, talking with Alex Rosado. Alex, where can people find you on social media?
So my Twitter account or X account is Alex P Rosado, all within one word, and an Instagram handle of alex.p.rosado.
Very good. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back. It's our fourth and final segment today. Happy to welcome Tyler Curtis back to the program. Tyler, it's been a while since we've talked, but for those meeting you for the first time, we know, first of all, you're a Young Voices contributor, but tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back, Brian. It's good to see you again. So my day job, I work as a loan officer at a local community bank in my hometown. And then in my free time, I contribute articles with Young Voices.
Very good. And this is a timely one. This is an article that you wrote for, hang on, I got to double check it's National Review. Sorry, just had to make sure I was given the right source credit here about how more deposit insurance won't prevent the next banking crisis. And first of all, I have to ask, with all the other crises going on, I haven't been paying as close attention to the banks. What's happening within the financial world? Are there some crises that we need to keep an eye on?
I never like to make predictions, and unfortunately, working in the banking sector, I get asked a lot to make predictions about both the economy at large, where interest rates are heading. A lot of people are very nervous about why interest rates have remained high for a couple years now, making housing unaffordable and other things. I'm not going to make any predictions about where the banking sector is at right now. It appears, on the surface at least, to be stable. But just as with to the crisis of 2008, 2009, these things can be very unpredictable. There was a lot of concern early last spring. If your listeners remember, there was it looked like we were on the verge of a banking crisis. The Federal Reserve had increased interest rates at a clip. The pace was unprecedented at the time that they were raising interest rates. They were at rock bottom during the COVID pandemic, and then they hiked them up as inflation got out of control. And this was the fastest rate of interest rate increase, I believe, in American history.
Wow.
So there was a lot of concern about that. And then seemingly out of nowhere, there was a very large bank, Silicon Valley Bank, failed and was taken over by the FDIC. In short succession, there were a few other banks, most notably Signature Bank, based out of New York City. But then there were a couple of other smaller regional banks that suffered failure. So it appeared to be maybe these are the first dominoes that are going to fall in a banking crisis that may be on the scale of the 08-09 crisis or perhaps even larger. Thankfully, we avoided that. It does look like these banks that failed, they had unique circumstances that led to their failures that were not endemic to the rest of the banking industry. But like I said, these things are somewhat unpredictable.
So when this happens, and I'm being sarcastic as I say this, some banks can thank their lucky stars that they're just too big to fail, meaning the U.S. government will step in and bail them out. And you talk in this article about how when government steps in to bail out something, of course, people who are directly involved in the industry, oh, good, well, jobs are saved, and people feel secure. Well, thankfully, we know the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is going to be there to protect us, in case of a bank run or something. But there's a moral hazard that's created when the government steps in to protect banks from bad decisions. I think we talked about it with Silicon Valley Bank, but let's revisit. When we say the term moral hazard, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's an interesting term because when you hear the word moral, you think right or wrong. But in this case, it just refers to, broadly speaking, human behavior and the incentives that may make one person do something over a different choice that they have. And then hazard is moral hazard is it refers to the incentives that cause a person to take on more unnecessary risk because they believe that somebody else is going to bear the costs of that risk. So I'm sure most, if not all of your listeners have car insurance. Nobody wants to get in a car accident, but they know that if they do, their insurance company is going to bear most, if not all, of the cost to repair their vehicle or their medical bills that may come up. But I would bet that all of us, the vast majority of us, would drive a heck of a lot slower and maybe more safely if there was no insurance and we had to bear 100% of the cost of all of our car repairs.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I remember as kids driving our parents' cars. We burned out and did donuts and reckless things that once we got our own cars and we were the ones buying the tires and paying the insurance, it was like, oh, not so fast.
Yeah.
Probably better be careful here.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, and you can see moral hazard in a lot of different facets of life. When it comes to banking, the FDIC, you probably have seen tags in the drive-through windows or on TV or radio ads that the bank is FDIC insured. Well, basically, that means that your deposits up to $250,000 per account holder per institution is going to be covered in case that bank goes out of business. So it creates a moral hazard problem because if you know that your funds are insured by the federal government, you're going to be a lot less likely to research the stability and safety of the bank that you're parking your deposit at. And then that in turn creates an incentive for the bank to act more recklessly because their depositors aren't monitoring them. They can attract depositors whether they are a safe institution or not. It encourages them to take on riskier investments, riskier loans, because they don't have to worry about if their depositors are going to say, well, hey, you guys are kind of taking on more unnecessary risk. I think I'm going to go down to the bank down the street and I'm going to deposit my funds there because the depositors aren't worried about it. So as long as the federal government stands by to bail out depositors because they're not monitoring their bank's safety and soundness, it creates a moral hazard, a bad incentive structure for banks to take on unnecessary risk, which in turn can create some problems for the economy at large.
So I'm just going to be blunt with this question, but I know it's on people's minds. Do we just let banks fail then? What happens when they fail? Or, some other industry too. The auto industry got bailed out in 2008, 2009. Should we just let them, take the loss?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting debate, and I respect people on both sides of that issue. I think the issue with deposit insurance is that it treats the disease, but doesn't prevent the crisis from happening. It actually makes it more likely that banks will take on risks and then fail. So the deposit insurance is sort of like a Band-Aid. It makes people whole after the bank has already failed, but it doesn't prevent the bank from failing in the first place. It actually makes it more likely that will happen.
Interesting. So, if I'm understanding it correctly, look, the reality is in this world, sometimes people will make, or companies, industries will make bad business decisions, and they need to own the results of that. That's a lesson for them as well as anybody else paying attention. Don't do that. But it also frees up capital that instead of being taxed away from the citizens and being put into, a company that may behave recklessly because, again, they've got that safety net, it could let it go into more productive areas where it could actually, be put to better use and not be at risk.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yep, you don't want to be put in a situation where you feel like your money is at risk by depositing it at a bank and it's your funds are not insured. But on the other hand, it does create, if you don't have deposit insurance, it incentivizes depositors to look a little bit more closely at where am I putting my money? Is this a safe institution? And that has good results for the sector at large.
So unfortunately, we're up against the clock here. We've only got about 30 seconds or so left, but where can people go to get a good take on this? I know this is a subject worth paying attention to. What are some of the resources you prefer?
Well, there was a great white paper put out by the Americans for Tax Reform and the James Madison Institute working together. They put that out a few months ago. It's about 20, 30 pages long. So very non-technical language in that white paper. So if people want to go check that out and delve a little bit deeper, that's a great resource.
Okay, and to find you on social media, where can they do that?
I'm on Twitter, well, X, formerly known as Twitter, at Tyler Curtis 42, and I write about a lot of different topics, not just banking. So, if you don't think the FDIC insurance is sexy enough, I write on other stuff.
Thank you so much, Tyler.
Hey, thanks, Brian.